Hello, good morning. So this is the poem "A River" that you have to do your assignment on. I'm sorry for there might be some noise at the background, but I'll try my best to explain whatever I can. So you know the whole poem has been explained. I'll do my annotations on this part while I read the poem. So there will be some notes for you, and then if there will be some reading material links that I will share with you that will also give you some idea, and hopefully you can make so. I mean, before your final submission, if you want me to take a look at the answer, please feel free to email it to me. Okay, the poem, it's called A River. Now, the very first thing that we take a look at when we are studying literature is the title. Now, what does the title tell you? Eventually, when we read, we will see that the title is chosen also to kind of tell you about the tone of the poem, about what the poet actually wants the reader to know. It's about a river, definitely, but what you see in the opening line, there is a contrast over here, right? So if we take a look at this, there is a contrast over here, and then the contrast is basically, I'll do my annotation here, so hopefully it will kind of help you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, now there is a contrast, and what does this contrast mean? While the name of the river, while the name of the poem is or the title is A River, then the the opening line is about a city that is more than a river. Madurai. So it is about Madurai. So you can see it's talking about a river, but then um, it starts with the name of a city, and that gives you the first hint about what it could be. So Madurai is a city that is on the banks of the river, but it clearly tells you the tone that the poet is adopting here, that whoever writes about the river only confines their subject to the description of the river and not really about the lives which the poet thinks is more important than just talking about the river. Okay, so I repeat what I meant. So the poem is called A River. So you're expecting to read about, read the poem about a river, but then you see it immediately starts with the name of a city, and then it goes on to talk about city of temples and poets and blah blah blah. Yes, there will be a description of the river, but the river, it comes as a trope. Okay, so what the poet is trying to say over here is, people are just talking about this river. There are poets who are describing in great verses about the river, but it is not just river. The river is important, but at the same time there are lives on the banks of this river. There is this whole cultural spot called Madurai on the banks of this river. So who writes about them? And then he is going to talk about the nonchalance. What do I mean by nonchalance? Is the indifference that people have towards the life. And sometimes even when the river becomes violent, even then the poets, they actually go and then find beauty in that violence, despite knowing that it is actually taking a toll on the human lives on the banks of it. Okay, so now in Madurai, city of temples and poets who sang of cities and temples every summer, the river dries to a trickle in the sand, bearing the sand ribs, straw, and woman's hair, clogging the water gates at rusty bars under the bridges with patches of repair all over them. And whetstones. Okay, so there's this another question that was asked. So about the imagery. Okay, so there are two distinct seasons being talked about in this poem. So this part, it is all about the summer. Okay, so I'm going to write over here. So this part is about summer. So, and how is summer being described here? As something, I mean, it's a time when the river actually dries up, and then you will see a very detailed imagery being produced. So what is meant by a detailed imagery? So how does the river look like during the summer when the water dries up, and what are the things that that comes out of the riverbed? Okay, so it's a detailed imagery. Okay, before that, well, let's just write. So there are two distinct seasons being talked about in the poem. One, summer, and the second one is monsoon. Okay, now the first one, summer, the detailed description is about the riverbed. So basically, the riverbed is you know, when the whole river dries up. So what you see there, when the water dries up. Okay, when the water dries up. So you can see. So we are talking about every summer. So there is a clear indication that we are going to talk about summer here. And so what are the things that are being listed? So I'm going to list it over here. So when we are talking about summer, what are the things that are being listed here? Okay, so it bears the sand. So that means the basin, the river basin, the sand is out, sand ribs, straw of straw, and women's straw is basically, you know, the dried rice. So basically the paddy, right? So when you cut off the crops, and then it's, you know, the dry part that you throw away, and then, you know, so that's basically the straw. It's the dried up stem of the paddy. Okay, so there bears the sand. You can see the dry straw which are being thrown into the river, and now they can be seen underneath when the water is dry. Okay, you can see women's hair clogging the water gates. So water gates is basically, you know, the river, and then you have those the canals and all these things, and then you can see like it's tuft of hair that gets clogged over there. So tuft of hair that that uh, gets clogged at different places, and all these are visible now because the water is no longer there. It's summer, it's a dry spell, and all the water has dried up, and that's why whatever is there underneath the water, when the river is full, all these things you cannot see because it's all water there. But now that the river has dried up, so these are all the imagery. So this is the summer imagery that we are talking about. Okay, I'll write it here so you know better. These are all the summer imagery. Okay, tuft of water, hair clogged at different places, and then the rusty bars under the. So you have the bridges all over. I mean, there are bridges that covers the river, and now we have this because the pillars all are rusty. So when we have again when it's the rainy season, when the river is full, you have the water and everything is covered up. Now that it is a summer, and the riverbed has dried up, so all these things have become visible. Okay, so the last thing will be all the bridges and the rusty and weary looking parts of the bridges are now all visible. So over here as a repair with patches of repair all over them, so that means like visible. Some parts of those bridges have been repaired time and again. Okay, and then there are some. Okay, so this is wet stones glistening like sleepy crocodile. This is a simile. Okay, this is called a simile. So now you have the stones that look like crocodiles when they come onto the shore to to maybe dry. So the uses a simile where he compares the stones with the crocodiles who come to the shore to dry. And there is one more, dry ones shaven buffalo lounging in the sun. So that is this part. Is talking about water buffaloes. Another one. Okay, so these are two similes that are used by the poet in order to enrich the the description, or the the imagery that we are talking about here. Okay, so the first imagery is that of the crocodile, and then the second imagery. Okay, let's move it here so you know. And this one goes here. Okay, the second one is basically the dry rocks that are now visible are being compared to water buffaloes who are okay. So what are they? They are lounging in the sun. Who are lounging in the sun? So basically, it looks like those animals who would relax in the sun after taking a bath in the river. Okay, so this is the first stanza imagery, the imagery that relates to summer, And these are the details that we can find in the very first stanza of the poem. Now, if you take a look at it, it is the poet is again going back to describing the river, even though it started with Madurai, and eventually the tone of the poem will become clearer later in the later part of the poem, where he actually talks about the floods. Okay, the poets only sang of the flood. So what he is saying is, the poets or the writers who generally write about this river, they are only talking about the flood, or so they only talk about the flood. Okay, so if I annotate this, so it will mean, okay, let's see. Okay, if I annotate this, this will mean that the poet says that there are so many things that a writer can talk about when looking at the river in the summertime, but the only things that the poets are interested in is to describe the river when it is overflowing during the rainy season. Understand? So that is my annotation here. So there is this whole summer description, and then the poet goes on to say, like, he doesn't like the fact that poets are only talking about when the river is flooding. Next stanza, he moves on to describe the flood. So he was here for a day when they had floods. People everywhere talked about the inches rising. Okay, so this is it, inches rising, of the precise number of cobble steps run over by the water. So that means cobble steps is, we have the ghat, the rivers at the ghats. So, and the cobble, basically you use those small rocks to create those ghats. So how many steps of the ghat has been covered by the river? Rising on the bathing places. So the water level is rising. And the way it carried off 3 villages. So the poets are all writing about how 3 different villages have been flooded. So because of the overflowing water, the houses and the whole village has been washed off, and 1 pregnant woman and a couple of cows. Of course, their name is Gopi and Brinda. Okay, now, so what do we annotate here is this. Let me put a text box and okay, so what he says is, now the poet is talking about the river in the monsoon, the rainy season, and when the river starts overflowing. So he lists the things that that capture the attention of the people, and also the writers who are writing about the river. So basically, the first thing that he talks about, that the river water is rising. Then he talks about how the steps in the ghat is getting submerged. Then he talks about how the bathing places are getting overflown by the water. And then you see there is this imagery is very important. Now okay, I will explain it. So the villages are getting washed away. And eventually it talks about a pregnant woman and couple. So basically a woman and cows. So human lives and animals are being harmed. So what you can see, this is the monsoon imagery. And one important thing about this poem, or rather about this imagery, is the gradual escalation of the harm created by the river during monsoon. Monsoon. Okay, what do I mean by escalation? Is basically it increases gradually. Okay, so what do I mean? The impact of the flooding river increases gradually during the monsoon season. Okay, so what does it mean by it increases gradually? So you see, the first thing is just the water rising, right? So this is number one. Then the ghats are getting, so basically the level of the water. Number one, level of the water, E, not eater, or water. Then it moves to the ghats being submerged. Okay, then after that it moves to how like bathing places. And then we see it is talking about properties being damaged and eventually lives lost. So you can see how it is gradually increasing, right? So that is called escalation, or the impact of the flood is gradually increasing. So that is one very important aspect of the monsoon imagery that we see here. And then the names of the, okay, now new poet still quoted the but the rest of it is quite okay, you can understand. So yeah, so when we are talking about imagery, when we are talking about the summer imagery, these are the points that you actually need to write in a form of a paragraph. And then finally, when you move on to the second stanza, and then you are going to talk about the monsoon, then you are going to talk about how the imagery actually helps you to understand the difficulty or the horrors of a flood that gradually increases. So from just the mere fact that the level of the water is rising to the fact that it actually causes harm to human life, this imagery of the monsoon river captures it all in a very short span. Okay, now the new poet still quoted the old poets, but no one spoke in verse of the pregnant woman drowned with perhaps twins in her kicking blank walls even before birth. He says the river water enough to be poetic, but this part, okay, I'm going to push it to the next page so it is very easy for you to understand what is happening in these two stanzas. Still quoted, new poet, old poet, still quoting each other. So it doesn't matter if you were a poet in the older times or if you are a poet in the newer times. What he says is the attitude of the poet, in irrespective of the time that they're writing in, is still the same. Okay, so attitude of, okay, let me shorten it a bit. Okay, yep. Okay, so attitude of the poets, irrespective of the times that they are writing this poem, remains the same. They are nonchalant, or what do we call it, indifferent to the various aspects of the river, or even the lives that depend on this river. Okay, so this is a tone. This, more than imagery, this part of the poem actually helps you with the tone, helps with the poet's tone. So the tone is sarcasm. He says that the poets or other writers do not find it important to talk about the lives that matter, but only stop at describing the river when it is flooding. Okay, so they don't, no one spoke. This is important. Okay, this no one spoke. And what did no one speak about? No one spoke about the woman. And this is what I am trying to tell you. Okay, so no one spoke about the woman when they just stop. Okay, who probably drowned with twins in her kicking. So basically she had twins in her womb, and then these twins were kicking inside the mother's womb, and then probably she was going to give birth, but then her life, and then the lives of the two babies that she was carrying just washed away. But nobody speaks about that. They are only describing the the river, or the water of the river. He says the water was enough. Okay, contrast it with this part. He says that the water was enough. Okay, so the loss of lives as if did not matter, and the poets did not talk about these things when writing about the river. About the river, they thought it was enough to just talk about the water and the scenery. Okay, would be poetic about once a year, and then it carries away in the half or three villages, couple of so basically it's just once a year only that they are going to talk about this whole thing. And then after that, when there is loss of lives, is the same sentiment which is being described again. As you can see here, this part is the same sentiment that is being expounded in this part. And we can say very clearly that the poet is talking about the same thing, that while talking about the river, these people, they have never talked about how it affects the lives of the people, how it affects, or how lives get lost and everything. Sorry, this should be day. Okay, they only talk about the river and the scenery and the beauty of the river, totally don't care about how lives are lost. Okay, I'm going to send you one more link with it. Hopefully it will help. Thank you very much. If you have any further question, please feel free to text me. Thank you.